Do you know what today is?
It's Friday, you ain't got no job, and you ain't got shit to do.
No, Smokey. We celebrating today. Yeah, today is Friday, but it's also January the 3rd, the day of the Genesis block, the day when Bitcoin was born in 2009. An anonymous developer named Satoshi Nakamoto created magic internet money and released it to the world, with Chancellor on the brink of bailouts inscribed in the very first block. Satoshi created something
everybody needs, no one can stop, few understand.
And people like Jim Cramer think Satoshi created Bitcoin to pump his bags.
Why do you think it's been so resilient here in the high 16s?
Well, I'll tell you what starts this, because it's phony and a scam. Being propped up by people who need it propped up, and that's all there is.
Wrong. Bitcoin was created because commerce on the internet has come to rely almost exclusively on financial institutions serving as trusted third parties to process electronic payments. Bitcoin was created because he said no mechanism exists to make payments over a communications channel without a trusted party. Bitcoin was created because central banks are unelected, unmonitored cartels who try to play God by creating money out of thin air. Bitcoin was created because
if the government can print the limited amounts of money, why did they collect taxes?
Beneath the nodes, beneath the code, there's more than bits. There's an idea, Jamie Dimon, Jim Cramer, Peter Schiff, and ideas are bulletproof. Today, we're diving into the beginning of this unlikely project that's poised to take down central banks. The final boss. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Let's go. With Bitcoin at 97,000 and it being the best performing asset in the world 11 out of the last 14 years, up 121% this year, and in the process absolutely dominating Ethereum, the NASDAQ 100, and the S&P 500. Bitcoin's price has risen from 1 cent on this day 16 years ago to over $96,000 a coin today. Bitcoin is the new benchmark. People just don't realize it yet. The S&P 500 is like,
I'm tripping, man. You want me to ask for my bike back? What bike? That's my bike, punk!
That's my benchmark, fool. Bitcoin is now seen as this inevitable foregone conclusion. Somehow because we're seeing it being adopted by financial institutions, and the name Satoshi is even now being included in the Oxford Dictionary. Let's not forget that on this day in 2009, Bitcoin was an idea, and a crazy one. Not decreed by governments or some large software company, but an individual whose idea was so original, people didn't believe that it was possible. The idea was absolutely insane. Satoshi said, what if there was something that was as scarce as a metal like gold, but had one magical property? It could be transported over any communications channel. And that communications channel is the internet. You merely adopted the internet, but Bitcoin was born in it. That's my Bane voice. Bitcoin was birthed out of 40 years of R&D and created a new combination of public key cryptography, peer-to-peer networks, digital signatures, cryptographic hash functions, cryptographic timestamps, and proof of work. In the process, he simultaneously avoided all of the failings of eCash, eGold, Hashcash, BitGold, B-Money, and reusable proof of works from the one and only Hal Finney. The problem with all of these projects is that they needed a central authority to operate. And governments are incredibly good at taking out anyone or anything that poses a threat to their monopoly. And people talk about Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer currency. But on a forum post on February 11th in 2009, it was clear that Satoshi Nakamoto had bigger plans than just payments on the internet. He identified all of the problems with our current monetary system. We need to trust third parties. He pointed out currency debasement issues from central banks, which lead to credit bubbles. He talked about fractional reserve banking, or the ability to rehypothecate coins or money and not actually keep real things in reserve. He talked about privacy, the thing that we had solved with cash, but somehow we introduced more vulnerabilities when we moved it to the internet. He talked about the lack of micropayments and overhead costs. And he pointed out the fact that every payment needs a middleman, a Visa, a MasterCard, an American Express that stands in between multiple parties. Bitcoin is the answer to the moral failings of fiat money and humanity itself, which has corrupted all of our monetary institutions. The majority of evils in the world come from the government having monopoly on the issuance and control of money.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that.
Do you see?
To the person who is about to grab their car keys and go to the ATM and take out $3,000, you say what?
Your ATM is safe, your banks are safe, there's enough cash in the financial system, and there is an infinite amount of cash at the Federal Reserve. We will do whatever we need to do to make sure that there's enough cash in the banking system.
Do you get the picture? Central banks have the authority to single-handedly pick the winners and the losers. They act unilaterally from elected officials in the shadows of a banking system behind closed doors with no transparency. With a click of a button, the Fed can devalue all of the world's savings, even foreign countries who are supporting the United States debt issue. And they use that money to line the pockets of prime dealers, like banks. Over 30% of all dollars created in the history of the world have been created in the last 5 years.
What we need today in the United States more than anything is the separation of money and the state, the separation of banking and the state. This is the cause of so many of our problems right now, is that the currency is controlled by the government. This allows us to spend way beyond our means to pull things off that we could never pull off if the government wasn't just printing money out of thin air. The entire idea that we're going to go around and occupy foreign countries for 20 years in the Middle East with nothing to show for it. Try doing that if you had to actually tax the people.
How was Satoshi supposed to take on governments and central banks this big and this strong? Was he supposed to engage in a head-on battle? Or was he supposed to take them on in the only way that he could, a sly roundabout way? But before we talk about that, I'm going to highlight 2 important lessons that you need to understand on your Bitcoin journey. Lesson number 1, not your keys, not your coin. On January 3rd, 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto introduced a way for billions of people to have property rights and to protect them through public key cryptography and digital signatures. But if you don't take self-custody of your Bitcoin, you're neglecting one of the most powerful things about the project itself. And that's why the Bitcoin Way exists. Members of their team will walk you through proper 100% self-custody step by step so you can remove all counterparty risk, stop sharing keys with third parties, and ensure you protect your generational wealth the right way. Go to thebitcoinway.com and schedule a free 30-minute consultation with their team. Lesson number 2, if you've been around Bitcoin for long enough, you'll have heard the term HODL, and you'll also hear the phrase, never sell your Bitcoin. And you'll probably hear about a company called Ledin, which for the last 6 years has been the go-to specialist in Bitcoin lending. They help clients unlock liquidity in dollars or their local currency without having to ever have to sell their Bitcoin. They've issued $6.5 billion in loans since 2018, supporting over tens of thousands of clients who want to borrow against their stacks with confidence and peace of mind. I've used the product myself. The loan process takes about 2 minutes and your account is funded in less than 24 hours. No monthly payments, repay anytime. They don't lend out your Bitcoin and they have a proof of reserves to prove it. Go to ledin.io/borrowing to borrow against your Bitcoin without ever having to sell it. One thing that people don't realize is that in order to mitigate authority and power from governments, you can't attack them head on. Satoshi needed to attack them in what Hayek calls a sly roundabout way, because the end result of all fiat monetary systems, central banks and governments is to control all of the assets wherever they are.
I don't believe that we should ever have a good money again before we take the thing out of the hands of government. And we can't take them violently out of the hands of government. All we can do is, by some sly roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop.
I remember the words of Hayek. You want to take money away from the state, you can't do it, in a frontal assault. You have to do it in a sly roundabout way. So my view is, how do you fight something which is so entrenched in the civilization that the harder you push, the harder it pushes back? And the answer is you have to introduce a new idea that will go viral. So, for example, Bitcoin is a new idea. You could view it as freedom technology, a freedom virus. And you can also view it as a monetary virus to give sound money to the world. So if I want to give freedom and sovereignty and dignity and empowerment to 8 billion people, I don't loudly scream that their overlords ought to stop leaning on them. I'm not going to topple every government and every corporate overlord and everything. So what I do is I introduce a new technology that spreads virally.
In places like Japan, freedom has been taken completely out of the hands of their citizens, and it's gone directly into the hands of their central bank. The Bank of Japan owns 80% of all the ETFs in the country and 7% of their overall stock market, and 47% of all of the country's bonds. This seems almost inevitable in the United States. Right now, the 2 largest people propping up this central bank debt fiat game are selling US treasuries in China and Japan. Japan sold almost $62 billion worth of treasuries in Q3. In China, over $51 billion. The only people playing this US debt game right now, increasingly, are small countries that need our help and ourselves. The United States government and central bank is maintaining this Ponzi scheme. But what happens if we have a recession?
Banks, by the way, have been regulated into buying treasuries as a reserve asset. Banks are going to be taking losses in a recession. They're going to need to be selling treasuries. This isn't speculation. We saw it in 1Q23. There was Silicon Valley and Signature. What were they trying to sell to raise cash, to pay out depositors? Treasuries. And oh, by the way, mom and pop are all of a sudden recession, out of a job. Well, who's been the biggest buyer, marginal buyer treasuries? Mom and pop. They're going to be, there's no buyer. And so you end up, what, in plain English, the entire treasury market will turn seller in a US recession. You will have, people can't fathom the trillions of net effective deficits, right? US deficits will be 13 to 20% of GDP. That'll be more than big enough to drive yields up in a recession. However, you're going to have banks selling alongside that. You're going to have foreigners selling alongside that. You're going to have mom and pop selling alongside that. And there's only one buyer. And that's where you get to this very binary outcome of collapse or Fed prints it.
This is why Satoshi Nakamoto created Bitcoin, to help us avoid the trust in third parties, like central banks, that we need to maintain this system, who we don't trust at all, who we didn't elect, and who steal from us through inflation and sly theft in so many ways that we don't even recognize. So the next time you hear someone on television talking about Satoshi and Bitcoin as a Ponzi scheme and someone created this project to pump their own bags, you know the real truth of what happened on January 3rd, 2009. Satoshi Nakamoto found a practical way to solve for rehypothecation with the double spend problem. And he also solved for the inflation problem with the novelty of digital scarcity. And he did it in a sly, roundabout, decentralized way that couldn't be stopped. The more and more we move away from this Genesis block, the more and more people think that this was inevitable. But it wasn't. It was truly an idea, an unstoppable idea in the form of code, which is being upheld through willing participants. And it's powered by the two commodities that we all need and can't be created or destroyed: time and energy. And with every block, we move closer to a brighter future. If you like this content, please subscribe to our channel. We put out content here 6 days a week, and we would love if you followed us on this journey. And if you want to connect with real Bitcoiners in real life and dive in deeper in your Bitcoin journey, then I encourage you to go to the BitBlockBoom conference on April 3rd through April 6th in Dallas, Texas. You're going to get to hear from great speakers like Parker Lewis, Guy Swan, Marty Bent, Bob Burnett, Gary Leland, and me. You're going to get to learn in exclusive workshops and attend great parties like the Saturday Casino Night to connect with Bitcoiners in real life. All of this is included in your all-inclusive ticket, which you can get $100 off of by going to BitBlockBoom.com and entering the promo code BBB25. That's BitBlockBoom.com with the promo code BBB25. This is Dante Cook with Bitcoin Simply. Happy Genesis Block Day. Cheers.